SEED, which stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity, which became the largest peer-led professional development project in the United States, helping faculty to create curricula, teaching methods, and classroom climates that are multicultural, gender fair, and inclusive of all students, regardless of their backgrounds. She directs the Gender, Race, and Inclusive Education Project, which provides workshops on privilege systems, feelings of fraudulence, and diversifying workplaces, curricula, and teaching methods. She is a recognized leader in fields which many of us are only now beginning to explore and seeking to change or combat, and which are very much in the air and on the ground in the USA at this particular time in our history. The title of Peggy's talk for today is Coming to Terms with Social Systems We Did Not Invent. So welcome, Peggy.
Thank you, Belinda. Thank you to CFA. It is delightful for me to come here in this gemütlich, comfy conference room. Somebody did a very nice job of designing. I feel we are held. I am here because of the work Belinda mentioned. 30 years ago, I published a list of 46 ways in which I feel I've had unearned advantage in my life because of being born white in a culture that favors whites. I was shocked to learn that this was true of me. Everything I thought I had earned was now clouded by the idea that at every step since birth, I had been aided by circumstances I did not invent. You can find that original paper on the website of the SEED project, the original paper and then the wonderful condensation of it from 19 pages to 3. Students love this paper because it is short. And it does contain still 26 of the 46 elements. All one word. On the home page, you'll find both the long and the short versions of the white privilege paper. So I have spent a lot of time looking at education and looking at society and looking at myself with regard to what the structures are out there and in here, and trying to use what I have found to help people diversify the curriculum and make it more inclusive. Now, my husband's a scientist, and many of you are scientists. I'm going to do an unscientific thing. I'm going to tell you my conclusions first. I'm starting with my conclusions. I will distribute this paper during the talk, but not quite yet. My first conclusion is that if you're working to make an institution or a personality more inclusive, it's a good idea to note the deeply rooted sense of hierarchy in us, as well as around us. We're not to blame for it. None of my work on privilege is about blame, shame, or guilt, because as the title of this talk indicated, we didn't invent these systems. We were born into them. That is one way of making an institution more inclusive, noticing the internalized hierarchies and then the actual hierarchies. Next. I think it's good to learn how to succeed within or despite the power systems by learning the necessary languages, but using only parts of one's psyche to learn and act on those languages. That is, I believe we have about 30 parts to our psyches. And it doesn't make sense to me to wholly invest in the languages and behaviors of institutions outside of ourselves, but it certainly makes a lot of sense to invest heavily in learning the languages of the institutions, the conventions, and the enterprises we decide to use our brains with. Getting sucked into thinking only on the terms of the existing institution is probably not a good idea. My third takeaway from these 30 years of working with privilege ideas, it's best not to take them too individualistically. Studying privilege is not about oneself as a flawed or ignorant person. And it's not about whether one who is privileged in any respects is not a nice person. Niceness has almost nothing to do with it. So what are the privilege systems? I'm interested in the obvious ones of class and gender, race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, geography, language, access to education, parents' relation to money, parents' relation to education. I'm interested in all of that. I believe everybody in this room will have a combination of unearned advantage and unearned disadvantage. Nobody is living a life that is a bed of roses. And nobody is only a victim. Within that balance, we all have some kind of choice, whether we would like to use some of the energy and the resources we've been given by happenstance to change the nature of the environment we're in. That is a choice. I've never expected of men that they have to give over male privilege to make women better off. It's their choice. All of us who are white or light-skinned or born wealthy, there's nothing that says we must share our money, our gender, our resources with others. It is a choice. Trust your brain power, but learn to recognize the brain power of those you were taught to look down on. So most of my greatest teachers have been people of color, who I was definitely taught to look down on. In some cases, African American, in some cases, Asian American, and in some cases, Native American. I've co-directed the SEED project for the greater part of 25 years with a Cherokee woman. Those that I was taught to think of as lacking in higher civilized arts and thoughts have been my great teachers. But it's a discipline to have learned that I can learn from them and need to. Next, if you're a member of a dominant group, born into some kind of social power, it's good not to assume that you should be the first speaker in a meeting because of your social power. Watch your body language. Learn to listen in stillness and understand that nodding and smiling is not necessarily the best form of listening behavior. I was invited to Korea 4 times, and at the end of the 4th visit, I said, "Why do you keep inviting me? Because you don't like Americans." They said, "That's right, we don't like Americans. We'll have to go into conference to find out what we each think about your question. Why would we invite you? Because we don't like Americans." And a little group of 3 left the dinner table and came back, and they had concluded, and the spokeswoman spoke for the 3 of them. They said, "We invite you because you listen in silence. You listen in stillness Americans interrupt us with their faces. They said, this is a direct quote in English, they show their teeth. We would call that smiling. And they bob their necks. And we invite you because you listen in stillness. And I think I think they gave me too much credit. I was just trying so hard to capture, as if on a tape, everything that they said to me, that I had the great stone face on. And they read that as respect. Then my next conclusion is, where possible, establish a policy of co-planning, transparent co-planning, so that you not only decide on things together, how a program, a plan, an exploration should go, but that you have your reasons for why you decided, and try in your planning to share power across lines of gender or race or ethnicity or class. That idea I act on because it was the rule in the Quaker school in Pennsylvania that I attended. Every school office had to be held by a boy and a girl. I thought it was pretty stupid. Now I think it was pretty smart. It made every every boy in the school know that he would be sharing the power of an office with a woman. And it made us know, as females, we were eligible to run for all the offices that were available. It's a good way of running an institution, I believe. My next suggestion, if you want to make both the institution and the relationships more inclusive, is notice which of your colleagues have the most awareness of power dynamics in the lives you're living together. And remember that sometimes those who are most aware of power dynamics are the ones with the most insight. Those who don't think there are any power problems, power dynamics, power issues at stake, may be missing a great deal about the social life of the institution. My next suggestion is specifically to men. With regard to gender relations, men, please don't take your cues from Trump. By which I mean, now it's for that line that I said this shouldn't be on YouTube, because I don't want the heavy elephant foot to come down on any part of this institution. But for inner streaming today, right now, that's okay. I think it's okay. You're not going to be damaged by my statement here, but I think with regard to men not taking your cues from Trump, try not, even though you've been trained to do it by the media and advertising, try not to check out our body parts. We already do. Check out our body parts. We already do, those of us who are female, already do enough of that number on ourselves. We don't need men's collusion in making us feel imperfect because we're born female. Don't sexualize your workers. And even better, once you've realized the extent to which you have been taught to look at our bodies and judge us by them, try to help other men retrain themselves as well to get over it. Next, see if you can devise and help the institution to devise policies that are family-friendly and that have flexible options, including both unpaid and paid types of leave. Next, study phase theory, which I'm about to put on the board, and notice how your mind and your heart, but also your workplaces, are working in all 5 phases, because I believe what I'm about to sketch includes all of us and all workplaces. It's 5 interactive ways of seeing and being. I think they're just indigenous to U.S. institutional and personal life. Next, in meetings, try to tell your experience, not your opinions. Opinions are generalizations built off many things you've heard or seen or read or said. Your experience is harder to access, but it is the root of your authenticity. You can't grandstand about your experience in the way you can about some ideology or some piece of another theory. Try to stay with your experience. It makes the whole workplace more humane, and it decreases the privilege of those who are seen as authoritative. Next, cite each other's work, and cite the work of authors who are not so well known. Try to recognize when you are using ideas that you definitely got from somebody else back then. It's wonderful to see the citations for the women who 100 years ago were doing work here. And although they weren't meant to reflect on what they recorded on the plates, Levitt said, it's hard to stop the reflection. It's hard to hold it back. It's wonderful to see them cited now for their discoveries. Next, consider using serial testimony, for which I have a printout on the back table. In meetings, using serial testimony, you speak one by one without being interrupted or argued with 1 minute each. Time limit of 1 minute for each person. If you have nothing to say, you can just let your minute go by in silence. But in serial testimony, nobody may argue with you, because as your assignment comes, your slot comes. The aim is to speak from your experience, not to piggyback on what others have said, not to echo what others have said, but to speak for yourself. When you do serial testimony meetings, people know they will go to the meeting, they will speak, perhaps more than once. They will not be argued with. They will not be taken on. They will not be contested in contested territory, because your experience is your own experience, and you're an encyclopedic resource on your own experiences. Few institutional meetings allow you to reflect on what you're thinking in that minute, at that time, in reference to whatever topic the facilitator has laid out. You feel safe, you feel heard, and often it's a wonderful experience to listen to everybody else's minute. And then ponder, just ponder. That's the kind of thing that we do in the Seed Project. And Seed Project meetings, which occur monthly in a school or university, have the reputation for being, quote, the meeting everybody wants to go to. That's rare and wonderful. To be the meeting that everybody wants to be at. Finally, remember that work you do, or I do, on privilege systems is not about blame, shame, or guilt. It's about getting smarter about who and where we are. Those are my learnings from work on privilege, and now I map the sum of institutional and personal life on the picture I'm about to draw of 5 interactive phases of curricular and personal revision. They're interactive. All 5 of the phases are in me. They're in everybody I know. They each give you a different look at the world, each phase, and they affect behavior. they produce quite different types of behavior. When you're working to become more inclusive as a person or as an institution, it's pretty easy to stay in phase 1 if that's where you were raised to be. And then as you move down into phases 2, 3, 4, and 5, the psychic work gets more difficult and draws on more of the parts of your psyche than phase 1 does. So this is the image of excellence that I was given in Ridgewood, New Jersey elementary school. This is what the teachers valued, and I internalized it. Still with me very strongly. You never get over those strong teachings about what you're meant to be if they were effectively taught to you. Okay, these are the things in the psyche that I was taught to value. Being in control, being right, being very exact in my answers, especially in spelling and mathematics. Doing my work apart from all other children. No sharing of answers. My Cherokee friend said, well, the way we did math is everybody looked at everybody's paper until we all got it. Wasn't the aim to teach us math? But that was called, she said the white teachers called that cheating. This is, once I drew these characteristics that were rewarded in us, grades 1 through 6 in Ridgewood, New Jersey, I realized that explains why I was always psychologically worried. Was I okay? I was meant to climb toward the top, lest I fall toward the bottom. And it was very easy to fall toward the bottom because it was so broad, and the tops were so narrow. And there was a sense that you had to climb up ladders to get to the top and be better than the next child. And you had to win lest you lose. That was the hidden ethos. And those were the two alternatives we were given. And who would want to be a loser? You hear this coming out of the White House all the time now, the top and the bottom. The winners, the losers. And then I was worried, I was such a good girl. I was worried, do I have to do this all the time? When they tell us better and better every day in every way, does that mean the weekends? Do I have to do it on the weekends? And I never noticed that the teachers were not holding themselves to this high standard of better and better every day in every way, but they were producing psychological worry in all of us. Catherine Stimson, a great American feminist, has said of her alma mater, Bryn Mawr College, that the phantom of excellence hangs over Bryn Mawr, demoralizing all students. And once in the 50s and 60s, Kiyo Morimoto, who was the founding director of the Harvard Bureau of Study Council, told me that every single student at Harvard, he believed, was feeling like a fraud under the ideals of excellence at Harvard. Also, just veritas, isn't that an exaggeration? Knowing what you know of the universe, isn't it an exaggeration to claim that you know truth? You know an awful lot. What?
It's the Platonic ideal.
It's the Platonic ideal. And Kiyo, a very wonderful early college psychologist, said And it's demoralizing all of the students who think they've deceived somebody to get in here. So in any way, I was among the deceivable, feeling it was never enough, that I must climb toward the bottom, toward the top, lest I fall toward the bottom. And then I thought, well, Peggy, what you're actually drawing is not just your worried psyche, but a picture of institutions. These are all institutions, institutional pyramids, hierarchies. These are the institutions within which people are meant to climb actual ladders of pay, promotion, press, praise, prizes, prestige, and power. So I'm a child of World War II. So this is the military pinnacle. Here's the government. Here are our 1930s corporate heads. Let's say these were the churches. These were the educational institutions. They all had their pyramids, their pinnacles, and their ranking and judging. So then I said, no wonder I'm so uncomfortable in public life. I'm uncomfortable about pay, promotion, press, praise, prizes, prestige, and power. I wanted to crawl away to a value system which is very different. This one is vertical. And I wanted to crawl away, as I did every day after school, and play with my stuffed animals. And symbolically, it's very interesting to me in retrospect. My daily obsessive activity was to marry my stuffed animals to each other. And I think I was trying to do, and I would play the piano, harmony, and put my mother's flowers or shrubs on the piano. That was beauty. And I would read the service and marry each couple of stuffed animals to each other. Does that matter? Yes, tremendously. That's union. Freud would say that's sex, but I would say no, it was a desire not to be at war. And my rule for the stuffed animals was you have to be married each day to a different animal, which we would now call serial monogamy. But you must stay married for a day to this other creature. I did it as the daily ritual while my brother was forced by his gender training to play guns in the neighborhood. The only script was bang, bang, you're dead. And the kids, the boys, most wanted to be Yanks, because if they weren't on the Yanks side, then they were having to be on the Jap side or the German side. So it was war out of doors. For me, it was what's beneath the fault line of competition in this diagram. It was making and mending the fabric among all the stuffed animals with music, harmony and melody, and meaning having to do with being hugged. Up here, you win lest you lose, and it's competitive, and it draws on the part of all of us, which for our survival is a propensity for competition. However, we all also have the more symbiotic propensity here, in which it's beyond winning and losing. It's very much akin to agriculture and to housework. So you wash the dishes, you wash the dishes, you wash the dishes, and you don't win. And just when you begin to say, oh, the textbooks never mentioned all the repetitive, then it's time to wash the dishes. So that's the world below here, which draws on the propensity to do things with and for others at a humdrum level often, but also here. Here's the agricultural world. You plant the seed, maybe you water it, maybe you pray over it, maybe you fertilize it. If you're lucky, a harvest occurs and food comes to your table, but you will never have the mega meal and be done with eating. These are not winnable tasks. In addition, what I see here underneath the fault line, this is like a geological fault line. Here's the vertical rock. Here's the sedimentary rock. Down here are the great human affects, beyond winning and losing. This is the world of sex, which doesn't go well when the aim is to win. This is the world of friendship, which is sorely strained when the aim is to win. And this is, in my view, the world in which everything that's ever deeply touched us has a place in our soul. This is our multicultural psyche with 30 parts or more. And all of it constitutes the I, the me. It's much too complex for simplification. And this is all of that soul's connection to the invisible things in the world. And you'd be crazy to try to win over your soul. Now, I think all of this is in everybody, but schooling has stressed this. And when I was at Harvard, I realize it's long ago, 60 years, but this is phase 1. It's womanless, and it's all white. And it's what I was taught, what knowledge consisted of. So I internalized that and taught on that basis for many years. For example, at an all-girls school in New York City, I taught a wholly male curriculum and never noticed it. It never asked, why am I teaching about men to these girls? It just didn't cross my mind for 3 years. Phase 2 occurs when you begin to ask of an institutional program, why is it womanless and all white? Why is the curriculum containing no females? Now you get to the phase 2, curriculum of exceptions. You allow in, with your phase 1 mind, a few exceptions of people who seemed, or people or ideas, who seem better than their kind. Wherever their origins were, you say, well, we'll let in that one because it violates the womanless and all-white curriculum, but maybe there's something we're missing. Maybe we should let in a few of them, the feminist protesters, and maybe the feminists, the women who'd been told, yes, you may record the data, but the men will reflect on the data and make discoveries, and that's not your role. But you've still let in a few special women. Then comes phase 3. The underlings begin to get mad. They say, who invented this whole system in which we get silenced and used and disrespected? And others tell us what's important, and it doesn't include us. Well, the phase 3 is the world of anger and swearing and resistance and rebellion. This is the world of the so-called issues, the isms. Gosh, I'm running out of ink, so I will switch to a different color. What's under the fault line is brown. It's the soil. It's the dailiness. It's the groundedness. So let's hope the brown works. No. We're all out of brown. Do I have to revert to red? Okay. This is where the red is. This is the issues and protests, but they're still on an institutional base of accepting that the top is the top, and now we are rebelling against the top. What happens when you cross over to the sedimentary rock or the brown is that you reverse your sense of what matters. So here's Barbara McIntosh walking at Cold Spring Harbor among her corn plants. And Watson and Crick both said they thought she was crazy. She would walk in her corn and talk to the corn plants. Then she won the Nobel Prize for having discovered jumping genes. And they were astonished that this cracked woman had the same prize they had, Watson and Crick, the structure of DNA. In her acceptance speech, she said something very relational, very much grounded. She said, "It may seem unfair to accept a prize for having had so much pleasure over the years, asking the maize plant certain questions and listening to its responses." There's the lateral symbiotic discovery pattern. Not I wrest nature's or heaven's truths from them, but I relate to the corn and I make a major discovery by asking it questions and listening to its responses. I think that's just a wonderful illustration of science done in a way that is relational. You may not be able to do this with heavenly bodies, but it is a way of thinking what one has accomplished in more relational terms than I was taught in Ridgewood, New Jersey, where science was definitely top down and we learned it from experts, and that was the story. So this world of the psyche is what I call making and mending the fabric. It's down to earth. It is relational. This is very much soloistic. Look what I did. This one, making and mending the fabric, draws on Jean Baker Miller's psychological book, Toward a New Psychology of Women, in which she says there is no such thing as a self. There's no such thing as a self. There is only a self in relation. We're born into relation, held, and we remain in relation to others the rest of our lives. And doing relational work is often not very famous, not very rewarding financially, but it holds together families, institutions, psyches. Doing relational work on yourself is to acknowledge how many selves you have and then be a membrane that puts some kind of support around the plurality of who you are. Phase 4. The issues is the anger. Phase 4 is the calming down, the relational sense that all parts of our soul, all the human relations are, even when it's hard to get along with each other, are part of the fabric. It can tear. You can try to remend it. And then phase 5 is knowledge itself, redefined and reconstructed to include all of our manners of knowing and being and seeing and loving and living. That's phase 5. I see it as many years in the making, but often after a seed seminar, people call to talk about the seed seminar the night before, where they've been in serial testimony. They're bonded, and people will say, "We were in phase 5 tonight. We had it balanced out. We had it all balanced out." Teaching methods in astronomy or anything else. Actually, who am I to talk about teaching of astronomy? I will take that back. In all the fields I do know something about, teaching methods often start with what I had at Harvard in the 50s. I talk, the professor talks, we listen, we write it all down, we receive it. There's no question and answer period. Phase 2. The professor takes almost all the time and then says, are there any questions? And then the few brave people who put up their hands are seen by the professor as better than their kind, which is student, maybe even good enough to become a professor someday. And they get singled out as the stars. That's the exceptions pedagogy of favoring just a few talented, and they become the TAs and the TFs and the instructors. And the top-down phase 1 professor watches with pride as those he mentored or she mentored climb up the ladders and do well themselves. That's the phase 2 part. I have it in me strongly. I love coming back to across the street from Radcliffe and speaking with you, and you're not interrupting. I love being exceptional. I think it's in any of us to like being an exception. But it's not the only part of the psyche. Now, in phase 3, you ask, what is this ridiculousness anyway? Who said that one person should be speaking and the rest should be sitting and facing them? Who invented this crazy system of the academy? And that with that part of your mind, you can be skeptical about the wisdom of the way we've done education in this country. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm just saying there's a way of framing it, of seeing it as worthy of phase 3 anger. Why on earth are they still doing colloquia with individual speakers? Shouldn't these be circles with 10 people, 12, talking each time? Then phase 4. Phase 4 pedagogy involves many more diaries, journals, lists. You can be in phase 4 and say, my genre is not the outline. I can't do the outline. The outline claims that there's a place for everything and everything in its place. Reality doesn't come in outlines. I'm going to do lists. I'm going to hand in to the moderator my lists of what has been significant for me. I'm going to imitate Virginia Woolf, or I'm going to imitate Audre Lorde and her lists. I'm going to take my cue from something other than the top-down lecture format. And I love phase 4 teaching. The students want to be in class. When you're doing phase 4 teaching in a high school and the bell rings, the students don't move. They don't want to go. They feel held, respected, heard, illuminated, maybe inspired, but they love phase 4 teaching. And in the SEED seminar, the monthly meeting is a circle of 10 to 20 people using serial testimony, which shows that everybody has their own experience and all their experiences count. That is their sacred centers. But because everybody is listening to everybody else, it's a great magnification of the sense of connection, of relation, of understanding. That's phase 4. This uses all of our ways of teaching and learning and being and knowing. Down here, making and mending the fabric pedagogy is about how everybody is both a teacher and a learner. But that is really ridiculous if there are some bodies of knowledge for which there are experts who've done a great deal of very careful work to become more or less certain about or definitely interested in something that only they can really talk coherently about. So I will never throw out phase 1 learning. And my father was an engineer with Bell Labs, and doing phase 1 top-down careful work resulted in, among other things, the invention of the transistor and the development of some of the earliest computers. Also, I have a nephew who teaches at MIT in engineering. His name is Seth Lloyd. He writes about black holes, and I would never think that anybody in the family could substitute for his lectures on black holes and incoherence. He is an expert, and he does phase 1 teaching, though he's got a very phase 4 connective personality. The pedagogy of phase 5 often takes place outside of a school building. And once I was asked to speak with 20 biology teachers in Georgia, and they said, we don't like the biology courses we're giving, and the students don't like taking them. So what's your advice? And I said, well, how did you all get into biology? And we did serial testimony. Turned out they had all collected something. And when they were collecting, they were, of course, doing taxonomy. And their parent would say, we're going home from the beach. You can't take 10 pounds of stones. Choose the stones you're going to take. And then they would be sorting, like the stripiest, the roundest, the blackest stones. They would make their collections that way. That's taxonomy, very basic. We helped them to stop doing what they said they hated, which is, in the biology class, they gave definitions, and the students down here had to memorize the definitions. It was very inorganic. So I suggested, why don't you, this is very phase 4, you're all on beautiful private school campuses in Georgia. Why don't you have each student choose a twig in September, a twig on some shrub, a twig, and make that their twig until May. You can protect it. You can feed the plant if you want. You can show it to your friends. The key thing is observe it. Be in relation to this twig. Students got interested in things like the chemistry of chlorophyll. They became enraptured by growth itself. This made the teachers and me very happy. And the students began to like biology. That's phase 5. Pedagogy. Can you do that in astronomy? You know better than I. But my guess is people who gravitate toward your field are grateful for any teaching that they can get, because the field itself is so exciting. And so maybe you can do straight old top-down teaching in astronomy, and the way I would put it is get away with it, because the students will not insist that you become more relational or more interesting. You've got a magic field here to work with. So it's 10 of 5. I have told you some things about what I advise and what I care about, and now I'd be happy to hear from any of you about any comment you wish to make. Now, phase 1, you would be asked to ask a question, and I would answer it. No, this is phase 4. Say anything you like. It does not have to be a question.
We're not used to this. I just want to say I'm very intrigued by your connection to Quakerism. As someone who also went to Quaker schools,
Yeah.
I see a lot of that influence in what you just described. So.
Well, then you will relate to this, that I locate the soul there down with the earth instead of up on a pinnacle, which is theological. Yeah. The Quaker theology is very wispy. It's just there is that of God in every person. Is that what you were taught?
That is what I was taught, yes.
It's very ecumenical, isn't it? Though our Quaker religion teacher, as a 15-year-old, I was too stuck up to notice what he was doing, and that it was excellent. He taught us about Hinduism, Islam, Confucianism, other types of Buddhism, Taoism. I kept thinking, we should just study the best religion. And he never got to Christianity. Yes.
I'm teaching a course right now to adults, and you do it with a circle.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we found was really useful is it's a history course, and there are occasional documents where people list things. So we just go around the table and have everybody read one thing from the list. And we haven't done, I've taught pieces of this course several times with the same co-teacher. And this time, like, everybody's really gotten into it, just by reading, without really criticizing till after everybody's read. But it's like definitely placed person by person, and it's a distinct amount. And it's been really exciting to watch all the students get so enthusiastic.
Yes, it's such. What's it a change from that makes them so enthusiastic?
Well, it's a history course, and so there's lots of facts, and it's a religious history course, so it's facts. It's like beliefs too, and it sort of detaches people a little bit from their own beliefs, and so they're looking at other things a little more. I think that's my current theory.
You have a plural pedagogy there, where everybody is reading some things,
Right.
and they're listening.
Right, and we have two teachers, and we sit at opposite ends of the circle, and we don't agree about a lot of things. So we'll contradict each other. That makes it more interesting.
It's quite exciting. It is quite exciting, and I'm not surprised that students find it a welcome relief. There are things, when I was learning photography, I did want to know exactly how you develop and print. I did want to have an authoritative Phase 1 teacher. That's relevant for certain things. And when my knees are replaced by a surgeon, I definitely want him to have Phase 1 skills in the human knee.
Her.
Actually, it's a him.
Specific surgery.
But your point is well taken, him or her.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, when science is done as an epistemological methodology, as we are as scientists all trying to do here, there's a lot about human nature that has to be excluded.
Yes.
And, in fact, much of the enterprise is not actually consistent with human nature. You can't ask everyone's opinion and then come to a correct scientific conclusion.
No.
And it seems to me that that dichotomy is not necessarily one of race or gender, but it is a real dichotomy that all of these phases that you discuss are some of them are very humanistic and they relate to human nature, but they're not really consistent with the scientific enterprise.
Well, depending on how you define the scientific enterprise, because remember Watson and Crick thought
well-known jerks.
Yes, when I was a graduate student monitoring a dorm, somebody came in after a date with Watson, and we all said, "How was it? How was it?" He's a jerk. However, remember that Barbara McClintock also did science, genetic science, won the Nobel Prize for relating in this rather humanistic way. She said, asking the maize plant certain questions and listening to its responses.
Well, the maize actually talk back.
She felt they did.
Well, she was wrong about that.
Can I offer a counterpoint?
Yes, go ahead.
So, in science, it's not necessarily talking about your opinions, but they're things that you observe based on fact, based on what is out there in the universe or in a corn plant or something. And then the difference would be not necessarily how you talk about your opinions, but how you express your knowledge. And different people have different methods for communicating that knowledge, which is very much tied to ethnicity, race, economic stability, gender, all of the things that we've just talked about today. So I do think it's actually incredibly relevant to the scientific process.
Especially this distinction you're making between different ways of talking about what it is you, quote, know. Your angles of vision on that. The phase theory entertains many. And there is a printout of the basic phase theory on the back table, and you can have a look at it. And also the 15 things that I've read at the beginning, they're also in a list that Belinda Wilkes, to whom I'm indebted for this invitation, inspired. So I'll take one more question and then we'll be done. It's 3 minutes before the hour.
We can go beyond 5.
Oh,
Go to about.
I see.
Yeah, we're out of class.
One more comment.
I actually have 2 comments.
Why don't you step out so we can hear you better? Me.
One of the difficulties is that hard sciences, physical sciences, are reductionist. And so in a way they lend themselves to this one way of approaching a truth.
Yes.
Call it that. If you look at biological sciences or complex organisms, where you can't reduce it to a single element because everything ties together in a much more complex fashion, I think that's where you can start looking at less, you can't do reductionists, so you have to look at a more holistic approach to finding out what the truth is. I mean, my family are medical doctors, and I'm astonished that we work. I'm astonished that we can solve problems with diseases just because of how complex organic organisms are. So that was one thing I wanted, that one thought I had. The other thought I had was that you spoke today about teaching and education. But the organism that we are in has this hierarchical structure which fights against your phases in a sense, because it's designed to be hierarchical. People are rewarded because of certain things, where they stand in the hierarchy. And so if you go within that and you say, okay, we're now going to teach things, we're going to have all these different phases of teaching, we're going to try to do a phase 4 teaching. But your hierarchy is still only phase 1. When you look at this organization, the people who are celebrated are the PhD scientists, because they get the papers, they get the grants.
Yeah.
Those who don't have the PhDs are not as well celebrated. All of the people, the admin people here who perform an enormous amount of work so that the PhD scientists can produce all of these papers, they're not in this, this is a phase 1 picture still. We still have this very top-down hierarchy. And so at some point, I always think that you put these things together and people's minds will explode or something because they don't fit together.
Well, I say all of the phases are in one mind. There are different ways
And our
of
minds
thinking.
don't explode.
Wellesley now has a president. Under phase 1, Wellesley could not have a black president. Wellesley has a black president, and her assistant is also black. And that was unthinkable in phase 1, and also, I would say she's in phase 2. She was at the Brigham and important in a women's program. But change can happen if you say the organism of the university has many potentialities. Some are pinnacle and competitive, but others have to do with making and mending the fabric. And tomorrow I'll be meeting with the Women in Science group. They're not on the tops of the pinnacles, most of them, but they're very real. They're like the yeast in the soil. They're there. And you will hear more of them. You will hear more of them. But if you construe the whole institution as containing all the phases together with 5, then I'm very hopeful that we needn't try to jettison the pinnacles at the top, but enrich what's considered worth thinking, worth saying, worth believing.
You are very helpful.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful. Because I do see some change. I have a friend whose husband, a black man, tried to run for mayor of Enfield, North Carolina. The Ku Klux Klan burned a cross on their lawn. That was 50 years ago. Now, this same black woman, her black nephew, is mayor of the town. Change can happen. Change can happen. anything you do to make more inclusive both the institution and the self is, I think, organically useful. It's not a revolution, but it does produce some change. Now, it turns out we didn't have to stop at 5, so what would you like to say further?
I'd like to say 2 things.
Yes.
It goes back to something you picked me up on today. I came out when we were chatting with this expression I grew up with, and maybe other Brits in the room did too. It takes all sorts to make a world. Is that a saying that's used in the US?
Yes.
Yeah. It takes all sorts to make a world. Now, we PhD scientists are apparently privileged in this organization. However, we could not do our work without all the other people around us supporting our computer systems and doing the paperwork for hiring and all the other things to do, doing our travel, etc., etc. If we learn to recognize their talents in doing those things, then we'll be much less a top-down organization than we are. I think we are moving in that direction as a society, but it will take a while because everything else is ingrained in us. But if we just, in our own community, start recognizing the work and the talents of the people around us who are not doing the same job as we are, and realize that only with all of those people here is this organization going to work, then we'll have a much more friendly and inclusive environment. That's one thing. And another thing, I'd like to take an issue with you on solving a science problem. You don't all stand around and say, my opinion is this, therefore it's right. If you're going to solve a science problem, there are different angles to looking at every source out there. They're complicated. You look in the X-rays, you look in the optical, you look at the timing, you look at the spectrum. And you're only going to understand it if you put all those things together. So get those people in the room and ask each one what they think and what they found from their data. And then you come up with a bigger picture.
But
Yes.
some of those opinions may be
I'm not talking about
non-scientific or
opinions.
anti-scientific.
I'm not talking about opinions. I'm talking about what the data is telling us.
Well, that's good. I have had
Which is also what she said in the
many
Peggy said in the first
female
place.
colleagues and people who are not white as colleagues, and they have made important contributions. And I even recognize that their style of doing science is perhaps a little different because of their different background, and
Good.
that's useful.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, in the scientific enterprise, you can't allow non-scientific processes to
Of course not.
dominate.
Of course
as,
not.
As it is. with-
But opinions are non-scientific. It's the data that has to inform us. And if you have people in the room who have different knowledge, different aspects of the knowledge, you can put it all together to make a final picture. And you need to do that if you're going to have a complete picture of anything. Well, certainly of black holes. Because, quasars emit every part of the spectrum. So we need to look, and we need to have people who have expertise in all those areas. And no one is better than any other.
Are
Except the
you,
X-rays.
are you implying that the contributions of the people of color and the women that you're thinking of are not scientific?
No. I'm saying that some people do have non-scientific approaches, and when those non-scientific approaches are brought forth, the rejection of those approaches are often met with the accusation that you're rejecting my idea because you're not sufficiently woke.
I don't think that's what anybody's saying.
I mean, I agree if that's the case, obviously.
Well,
We all
it's
agree.
happened to me. A couple of times I've had, discussions with colleagues about, mathematical methodologies in which, the other person was simply wrong. They were just wrong. And, often that is resolved scientifically, but it can devolve into, you think I'm wrong because I'm different and you're privileged and I'm not, and, you're putting me down. It's actually something of a disadvantage, I think, for people who are traditionally prejudiced against, in that they don't know whether the reason they're being clobbered is because of race or because of racism or sexism, or whether it's because they actually have a bad idea and it deserves to be clobbered. And that is a problem.
Yeah, well, you started with me implying that all of this stuff doesn't really count because it doesn't have to do with scientific thinking. My husband's a virologist. He thinks the phase theory has a great deal to do with he's at Harvard Medical School. The phase theory has a great deal to do with improving scientific thinking. But I didn't take you on, but I said, well, that's a phase one man. And I'm glad we've been able to clarify a little, but my guess is that the very word clobbered, rather than questioned, shows a certain aggressiveness.
Well, these arguments went on and became, increasingly irritating and stupid because they were simply wrong.
Okay, well, you're pretty clear about what's simply wrong. I'm not, but that you could attribute that to the humanities. But also, I favor the pluralists like William James and John Dewey, both of whom honored many angles of vision on something before you declare right and wrong.
Well, I would certainly, say that scientific truth is always contingent and that it's never absolute, and it's not, a matter of top-down pedagogy, except at the very, most elementary levels.
Well, I quite agree with that. Right, wrong, yes, no, winner, loser, all of those are pretty primitive ways of thinking. Complexity, 30 personalities in each of us, that for me, that's music to my ears. That's complex enough for the subject at hand, which is us and our lives.
One more thought in the last minute.
Sort of off base, but I feel like there's a big pushback right now from the Trump people or
Yeah.
the white supremacists that are planning to rally in Concord on Monday. It's sort of like we're sort of almost in this battle on the two sides of this argument where there's a lot of people invested in keeping it phase one.
Yeah, the Aryan nations and the Klan and Trump are invested in a kind of purification of the United States to the point where we are white. And I'm not sure what he would say about religion, but I think white anyway. And it is a very trying time to live in if you're trying to make everybody belong, because Trump and his minions do not believe that everybody belongs.
Okay.
So what do we do? I think, in the words of our black colleagues, we keep on keeping on. We keep on keeping on. And there are no easy answers for us right now. Rush Limbaugh says, I have ruined education in the United States. What do I do with that information?
Enjoy it.
I was just going to say you can march for science this Saturday.
March for Science this Saturday. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
There's a March for Science this Saturday in Boston.
Oh,
I
hooray.
expect to see everybody there.
Hooray. I think scientists have been wonderfully resolute that they're not going to give way to propaganda and nor have any respect for the lies coming out of the White House. One thing you guys don't do, you women don't do, is just outright lie and say anything you want. You know that would be unethical.
Speaking of that, I was wondering if you have an opinion about why on the news nobody ever says lie when you're talking about what comes out of the White House. They always say, false or whatever the euphemisms are.
False,
They never say lie, which is what they are.
I think that Rachel Maddow on MSNBC does use the word lie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Law has been coming into prominence more and more.
But it was fear of having the elephant foot descend on you or your institution or your network. It's fear of the power of a tyrant.
Well, that's clearer how Hitler got to power.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Either that whole-
Okay, one more from the back, and then we have a bit of time.
To return to a more local matter, and in terms of what is, how do we get great science, and how do all these other things fit into it? Okay, Henrietta Leavitt over there, 100 years ago,
Yeah.
when she was looking at, if you look at those plates with thousands of stars on them, it wasn't, what has always astounded me about her finding of the period luminosity relation was that wasn't something somebody was looking for. That wasn't anything anybody had any idea existed. It was as she was painstakingly going through all this data, suddenly one day she said, oh my gosh, look at this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that had been set out to be found. We need to test this, we need, they knew there'd be fun things that would come up, but who knew what they were going to be? And that's what it was. And that is certainly a crucial aspect of science. It's finding what you weren't looking for.
Certainly, and observing first and then analyzing. So Natural Science 6, taught by Bill Drury and Don Kennedy at Harvard in the 50s, taught us this. We will take you to a habitat, because the course is on habitats. Observe. What should we observe? Observe. It's like what Louis Agassiz said to William James. Observe this fish. Tell me what you've observed, and then go back and look at it again, and then tell me what you've observed. He did what I'm calling observation before analysis. I think it's a key to scientific method.
Okay.
It makes teachers uncomfortable to take a busload of students out to Nahant and unload them on a intertidal zone and say, observe. It takes the teacher away from the podium, off the authority pedestal. The teacher is just there, observing too. Then you go back to class. Then the teacher does give you tools, maybe phase 1 tools, about some of what you've seen, but meanwhile he's collected all your journals. Therein may lie one of the Rachel Carson's discoveries of what happens in the intertidal zone. So I love what you're saying about looking and not necessarily looking for something, but seeing what you have discovered. It's great for human relations too.
Okay, let's thank